Thanksgiving has always been a complicated holiday in my family. For most people, it's about turkey, football, and awkward small talk with relatives they only see once a year. For me, it's always felt like walking into a battlefield with pie. Growing up, I learned early on that praise and affection in our house were doled out like ration sugar, unevenly and never without strings. Still, I kept showing up, year after year. Smile on my face, bottle of Pinot in one hand, sweet potato casserole in the other. Like clockwork. But this year? This year was different. Dinner was held at my parents' house in suburban Colorado. They have one of those sprawling homes in a neighborhood where the lawns all look identical and the Christmas lights go up before Halloween is even over. I got there around 2, dressed in my usual understated but elegant way, wearing a soft navy cashmere sweater and black trousers, hair pulled into a low bun, subtle jewelry. I always kept it classic, nothing flashy, just refined. Lauren, my younger sister, showed up about 20 minutes after me, of course, with her husband Evan and their 2 kids. She was in some sparkly dress that looked like it belonged at a cocktail party, not a family dinner, and Evan was already cracking open a beer before he took off his coat. My parents swooned over them as soon as they walked in. Lauren's the golden child. Always has been. I'm the one who's too independent, the one who takes things too seriously, the one who chooses work over family. Lauren, on the other hand, could light the backyard on fire and somehow be applauded for bringing warmth to the family gathering. I used to think maybe I was imagining the favoritism, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But at some point, the truth gets too loud to ignore. This year, it screamed in my face. The house was full that day. We had the usual suspects. Uncle Dean, who talks too loud and always smells faintly like cigars. Aunt Marlene, who insists on bringing her weird gelatin salad nobody ever eats, my cousin Jake with his new girlfriend who looked like she got lost on her way to Coachella, and of course my parents, standing at the center like they were hosting some kind of royal banquet. The food was as expected, overcooked turkey, dry stuffing, watery green beans, but everyone pretended it was amazing because that's what we do. We pretend. We had just finished passing around the cranberry sauce when the moment happened. I was sitting to the left of my dad, across from Lauren. She was rambling about her new wellness brand she was starting. Something about scented candles, organic teas, and affirmation cards. My mom was hanging on every word like Lauren had just solved the climate crisis. I kept my eyes on my plate, chewing slowly, sipping my wine, trying to focus on anything but the rising tide of irritation building in my chest. Then my mother turned to me and said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, like she wanted the words to reverberate through the walls. Your sister is twice the woman you'll ever be. It was said with such finality, such casual cruelty, like it had been sitting on her tongue for years just waiting for the perfect moment to be released. The room went still. You could have heard a pin drop between the scraping of forks and the sound of my wine glass as I slowly set it back on the table. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I just smiled, tipped my head slightly to the side. And then, very calmly, I said, "Then she can give back the $80,000 I spent on her wedding." Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Lauren went pale. I mean, truly colorless. Her mouth opened just slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. Her husband looked like he wanted to disappear into the stuffing. My dad's jaw tensed, but he didn't say a word. My mom blinked, as if trying to process what she had just heard. And Uncle Dean, good old, chatty, never shuts up Uncle Dean, sat with his fork midair, frozen, a piece of turkey dangling from his mouth like he had suddenly remembered how gravity worked. I hadn't planned on saying it. It wasn't some long con I had been waiting to execute. It just came out. Honest. Clean. Simple. The truth. And, oh, it landed. Because they all knew it was true. Every bit of it. When Lauren got engaged, she wanted a dream wedding. Problem was, she and Evan didn't have the money for it. My parents were already stretched thin from helping them buy their house. So who stepped up? Me. The spinster sister. The one with the cold heart and career tunnel vision. I paid for the venue. I covered the photographer. I paid the florist when Lauren changed her mind about the arrangements 3 days before the ceremony. I paid for the DJ. I covered the open bar. I even paid for the damn honeymoon upgrade because she just couldn't imagine going all that way and not staying in the Ocean View suite. $80,000. That's not a small favor. That's not a few bills or a quick Venmo. That was a year's worth of saving, sacrificing, delaying vacations, and skipping things I wanted for myself because I thought, maybe, just maybe, this would bring us closer. That after everything, if I did this one huge thing for her, for our family, maybe I would finally be seen, be valued, be loved. But no. Because standing in front of a room full of relatives, the only thing my mother could find to say was a line straight out of a bad soap opera. Your sister is twice the woman you'll ever be. There were no apologies. No backpedaling. Just a dense, unbearable silence. Lauren finally broke it by mumbling something about needing to check on the kids, and practically sprinted out of the room. Her husband followed, leaving his plate untouched. My mother sat stiffly, trying to look composed, but her hands were trembling as she picked up her wine. My dad just stared at his plate, the way he always did when he didn't want to deal with reality. The conversation around the table didn't resume. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody dared to try. I stayed for another 5 minutes. Finished my glass of wine. Dabbed my mouth with my napkin. Then I stood up, thanked them for dinner with a politeness that felt almost surgical, and walked out. No yelling. No tears. Just truth. That was the last Thanksgiving I ever attended with my family. And to this day, I don't regret a single word. I've always been the reliable one. The one who kept her head down, followed the rules, did what was expected. From the time we were kids, I understood that if I wanted anything, respect, stability, even a sliver of attention, I had to earn it. I studied hard. I didn't complain. I never got into trouble. While my sister Lauren was skipping curfew, smoking behind the garage, and cycling through friend groups like seasonal outfits, I was the one setting the dinner table and memorizing multiplication tables before anyone asked. I wasn't looking for praise. I just wanted to be seen. At 25, I'm a senior operations manager at a tech firm in downtown Chicago. It's not the kind of job you get by accident. I started as an intern during undergrad, put in 60-hour weeks, built performance models from scratch, reorganized supply chains, hit every target ahead of schedule. I moved up faster than most, not because I played politics or schmoozed at networking events, but because I'm damn good at what I do. I rent a one-bedroom in Lincoln Park that I pay for on my own. No roommates. No bailout fund. My fridge is stocked, my bills are paid, and I even managed to send extra money to my parents when they need it, which they somehow always do. And yet, none of it has ever been enough. Lauren, 2 years younger than me, is what my mom calls a creative spirit. That's their favorite euphemism. She flunked out of college after 2 semesters and didn't bother reapplying. Said it wasn't aligned with her personal journey. Then came the influencer phase. She started posting on Instagram about yoga, kombucha, self-love, and radical alignment. I'm pretty sure she bought half her followers. She'd spend entire days staging photo shoots in the park, taking selfies with ring lights, posting about being a girl boss while living off her parents' credit card. At one point, she started a candle business that lasted about 6 weeks. Then it was Reiki. Then crystal healing. Now it's some vague brand consultancy where she offers vibrational coaching to confuse strangers online for a fee. She still lives in Boulder, in a house our parents helped her lease, with a golden retriever named Nova and a patio full of succulents. You'd think that kind of lifestyle would warrant concern, maybe a gentle intervention, or at least a few hard questions. Not in our family. In our family, Lauren is a butterfly, a visionary, a phoenix, as my mother once called her during dinner. Every new scheme, every failed venture, every impulsive life choice is treated like some whimsical act of bravery. She's just trying to find herself, they say. She has a different kind of intelligence. The world needs dreamers. Meanwhile, my career milestones are met with polite nods and the occasional, "That's nice, honey." When I got my promotion last year, I told my dad on the phone. He paused, said, "That's good," and then changed the subject to whether I'd seen the new siding they'd put on the house. When I bought my first car with my own money, brand new, not leased, not used, my mom said, "Be careful, those monthly payments sneak up on you." Lauren got a used Volkswagen gifted to her by our uncle, and my parents threw her a little backyard barbecue to celebrate her first big step toward independence. I don't think they realize how deep the imbalance runs. Or maybe they do, and they just don't care. It's not just in the big things. It's in the 1,000 tiny interactions that add up like sandbags until you're drowning under the weight. It's in the way my mom's voice lifts half an octave when Lauren walks into a room, like someone just turned on the sun. It's the way my dad used to give me financial advice like I was some wayward intern but would listen to Lauren talk about lunar phases like she was Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's how, when I bring a boyfriend home, someone with a degree, a steady job, a clean record, they grill him with questions. When Lauren shows up with some shirtless guy named River, who makes kombucha in his bathtub, they smile and ask if he's staying for dinner. I used to think if I just worked harder, if I could be exceptional enough, maybe they'd notice. Maybe they'd stop comparing us. But over time, it became clear I was never being measured by my own merits. I was just the shadow standing next to the golden child. She didn't have to prove anything to be loved. I had to prove everything just to be tolerated. The worst part is they don't even try to hide it. Holidays are a performance. I show up with a bottle of wine and a pie I baked from scratch, and Lauren breezes in an hour late with a pre-made salad and gets applauded for helping. When we were kids, she'd break something, and I'd get scolded for not watching her closely. When she lied, I got punished for creating an environment where she felt the need to hide things. It was always like that. Always my fault. Always her redemption arc. The Thanksgiving blow-up wasn't some isolated outburst. It was the culmination of 25 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing the bile of resentment, and pretending we were just a normal family with quirks. But we weren't. We aren't. We're a system of double standards held together by denial and selective memory. And I've spent my whole life being told that my ability to hold everything together was nothing special. Lauren gets to be the spark. I'm the glue. And glue doesn't get attention. It just holds the cracks in place. 6 months before that unforgettable Thanksgiving, the one that detonated years of suppressed tension in a single sentence, my sister Lauren got engaged to Brian, a bartender with a part-time job at a music store and dreams of becoming a guitarist, though I never once saw him book a single paid gig. They met at some New Age retreat in Sedona, where they bonded over chakra alignment and the belief that monogamy is a colonial construct, though apparently not enough for them to skip a traditional wedding. From the start, I knew where this was headed, even if I refused to admit it to myself. There's a tone my mother gets when she's about to ask me for something without really asking. It's half exhausted, half rehearsed, always lined with disappointment. It started with her sighing over coffee one Saturday morning during our usual weekend check-in call. I had just gotten out of back-to-back meetings that Friday night and barely slept, but she launched right in, telling me about this vineyard Lauren had fallen in love with. "It's so beautiful, Rachel," she said, drawing out the word like it was made of velvet. "There's this view of the hills at sunset that's just breathtaking. But, places like that aren't cheap. Still, your sister's always dreamed of something magical." I knew what she was doing. She was setting the stage. I should have shut it down right there. But instead, I nodded, said, "Sounds nice," and let her keep going. Over the next few weeks, the calls became more pointed. There were murmurs about caterers who booked out a year in advance, about dress appointments that couldn't be missed, about Lauren being overwhelmed with planning. My mom would slip in lines like, "You know how important this is for her," and "It's been such a tough year for Lauren. This will really lift her spirits." The implication hung in the air like smoke. That Lauren, who hadn't held a steady job in over 3 years, who still got checks from my parents when rent was due, who thought budgets were a form of oppression, was somehow entitled to a luxury wedding, and it was on me, the successful sister, to make it happen. At first, it was little things. A contribution toward the venue deposit. Then the floral designer wanted a 30% deposit to hold the date. The cake tasting had to be done soon, or they'd lose the slot. Lauren didn't ask directly. She never does. She just gushed about things and let the silence do the asking. My mother, though, was more straightforward, though she dressed it in guilt. "You know she's not like you, Rachel. She's not built for stress. If we could afford to help more, we would," but followed by a long pause, as if she was giving me space to fill in the blank with my bank account. And I did. Again and again. I told myself I was doing it because I could afford it, that it wasn't a big deal, that it was a gift. But deep down, I know I did it because some part of me believed, maybe foolishly, that this would be the moment they'd finally see me. That if I gave enough, contributed enough, sacrificed enough, I'd finally be acknowledged for more than just being reliable. It didn't stop at the venue. Soon I was covering the caterer, nearly $15,000 because Lauren couldn't decide between a plated dinner and stations, and ended up choosing both. Then came the alterations for her designer gown, which she changed her mind about twice, and which somehow required rush tailoring from a boutique tailor who charged by the hour like a neurosurgeon. I paid for the photographer, the transportation for guests, the welcome baskets for the out-of-town visitors. When Lauren found out the resort she wanted for her honeymoon had ocean view deluxe suites, she called me crying because the regular room just didn't feel right. I booked it that night. All in, by the time the wedding rolled around, I had spent just under $80,000. 80,000. I had spreadsheets tracking everything, because I couldn't even keep up with the receipts. I never made a big deal about it. Never brought it up. Never said no. Every time I wanted to draw a boundary, my mother would call with a sigh, say something about how money isn't everything, and how Lauren just needed this one day to feel special. And every time, I gave in, hoping that maybe this time, the giving would be enough. The wedding itself was everything they wanted. Held at that picturesque vineyard just outside Boulder, Lauren walked down the aisle barefoot, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that cost more than my rent. Brian wore a linen suit and played a song he'd written just for her on an acoustic guitar during the vows. My parents cried like they were watching a movie. The guests clapped and cooed and took pictures in front of the archway I paid to have custom built. No one asked who made it happen. No one thought to thank me. I gave a short toast, light and polished, and sat down while Lauren's college friend gave a 20-minute speech about how Lauren was a once-in-a-lifetime soul. After the wedding, Lauren and Brian left for their honeymoon in Mexico. My parents went back to talking about how radiant she looked. I went back to work. No thank you note. No conversation. Just another silent transaction in a family where my role has always been to provide, never to be praised. And when the bills started arriving, some of them in my inbox, others mailed to my address directly, I paid them. Every last one. Not because I had to. Not because anyone forced me. But because for a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, love could be bought in installments. It wasn't. Thanksgiving was just the spark, the final ignition of something that had been quietly smoldering inside me for over a decade. That one sentence from my mother, "Your sister is twice the woman you'll ever be," was just the audible form of what I had felt in 100 different ways across 10 long, exhausting years. The truth is, by the time I said what I said, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was emptied out, stripped of anything that could soften me or make me polite about it. You can only hold your breath for so long before your lungs give out. My resentment wasn't new. It hadn't appeared because of one slight or one insult. It had accumulated slowly, like sediment building in a riverbed. Quiet. Patient. Dense. It started the first time I loaned Lauren money and didn't get it back. I was 21, fresh out of college, just beginning my first full-time job at a logistics startup, barely affording my own rent and groceries. She had called crying because her car had broken down and she couldn't make it to her job at the smoothie place. My parents were tapped out from helping her with tuition, which she later abandoned, so naturally, they suggested I help. And I did. Of course I did. I sent $800 that same night. She never brought it up again. Then came the rent emergencies. One time she was being evicted. Another time her roommate bailed and she couldn't cover the lease. Another time the landlord had raised the rent and she didn't feel safe living with strangers, so she needed a deposit to move somewhere new. Each time, the calls were urgent, the voices soft, the guilt heavy. My mother would call too, always with that tired voice that implied I was their only hope. And maybe I was. I was the one with the job, the stable income, the predictable behavior. I was the one who didn't spend my weekends at moon circles or spend $300 on ethical incense. I didn't keep a running tab at the time. I should have. I didn't realize how quickly those transfers added up until one day, I was going through my bank history and saw page after page of outgoing money with vague notes like Lauren car or Lauren phone or B's guitar amp. I had paid for part of Brian's music equipment because they said it would help him record a demo. That demo was never made. I bought groceries for them more than once when they had a bad month. I covered a vet bill for their dog when they couldn't afford it, but didn't want Nova to suffer. I helped them get Wi-Fi turned back on after their service was suspended. Each moment felt small at the time. Each request seemed justifiable, even noble. And each time I told myself it was the last. It never was. All while this was happening, my own accomplishments were treated like filler content in family conversations. When I got promoted, it was always met with a tepid "that's great, sweetheart," before someone pivoted the conversation back to Lauren and whatever creative project she had abandoned or just started. When I bought my condo, they asked me 3 times if I was sure I wanted to live alone. When I earned a bonus for leading a successful rollout, my dad responded with, "That's why you're the practical one," which somehow felt more like a dismissal than a compliment. Practical. Boring. Predictable. They never said those words directly, but they didn't have to. It was in the tone, the timing, the way their eyes glazed over when I talked about my work. It was in the way my mother lit up when Lauren said she might launch a podcast, even though she had no microphone, no outline, no concept. It was in the way they looked at me sideways during family events, as if something about my success made them uncomfortable. Like the fact that I had chosen a life rooted in structure was somehow a personal rejection of theirs. And then there was the relationship scrutiny. Every time I visited without a boyfriend, my mother's eyes would narrow slightly. "Still single?" she'd ask, as if it were a flaw I hadn't managed to fix. If I brought someone, the interrogation was swift, clinical, quietly judgmental. "Does he want kids? Is he religious? Are you sure he's the right kind of ambitious?" When Lauren floated between deadbeat boyfriends, dated men who called themselves entrepreneurs but didn't have jobs, the scrutiny disappeared. My mother called them interesting and said Lauren was learning about herself. Once, when Lauren broke up with a guy because he didn't believe in astrology, our parents actually supported her decision. At first, I tried to play peacemaker. I reminded myself that family isn't perfect, that love can be quiet, that maybe someday they'd see me for more than just the person they called when things went wrong. But there comes a point where trying to earn love starts to feel more like begging, where being the family's emotional scaffolding turns into a kind of indentured servitude. I was the one who showed up, the one who remembered birthdays, who kept the traditions alive, who paid for Christmas dinners when our parents were short that year. I was the one they called when someone was in the hospital, when they needed help with flights, when taxes were due, when something broke. And yet I was also the one they talked over, the one they quietly pitted for being too career-focused, for not settling down, for not understanding Lauren's sensitive nature. I was never invited to be vulnerable because I wasn't allowed to break down. I wasn't the sister who got held when she cried. I was the one who cleaned up afterward. All those years, I carried it in silence. I smiled through it. I told myself I was above it, that I didn't need their approval. But that was a lie. I wanted it. I craved it more than I ever admitted, even to myself. So I kept giving. Financially, emotionally, logistically. I filled in the cracks so Lauren could live untethered. I did the responsible thing while she got the applause for simply existing with a dream and a story to tell. That's why the Thanksgiving moment wasn't just about a rude comment. It was the breaking of a dam. A public reminder that no matter what I gave, I'd never be enough. That the girl who floated through life on charm and chaos would always be held higher than the one who kept the entire structure from collapsing. And maybe that's the cruelest part of it all. Not that they didn't love me, but that they only knew how to love me when I was useful. The moment my mother said it, right there at the dinner table, in front of 20 relatives, wine glasses still clinking, forks halfway to mouths, something in me snapped. "Your sister is twice the woman you'll ever be." That sentence didn't just land, it detonated. It didn't echo, it rang like a verdict. Final. Public. Humiliating. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just leaned back in my chair, wrapped my hand around the stem of my wine glass with absolute calm, took a slow sip, and said, "Then she can give back the $80,000 I spent on her wedding." The silence was immediate and absolute. It wasn't the kind of pause that invited laughter or awkward coughs. It was the kind that presses against your skin, cold and dense. My sister Lauren froze, her fork still hovering midair. Her face drained of color, so fast I thought she might pass out. My mother blinked once, then again, like she was trying to compute what had just happened. My father looked stunned but also vaguely annoyed, like I had just broken something fragile in front of guests. And the rest of the table? Dead quiet. Even my Uncle Dean, who once told an inappropriate joke during a funeral reception, sat with his mouth slightly open. Lauren was the first to try and recover. She let out a sharp little laugh, high and fake, like she was trying to lift the mood. "Oh my God, Rachel. Don't be so dramatic. It wasn't like that." I turned my head slowly toward her, placed my wine glass gently on the table, and smiled without warmth. "No? Would you like me to walk everyone through the breakdown?" My voice was level, almost disturbingly so. "Because I have it. Right here." I reached for my phone from my purse, opened the spreadsheet app I'd kept not because I was petty, but because I needed to keep track. That wedding nearly wiped out my emergency savings. It had been months of invoices and bank transfers and last-minute charges I was expected to absorb with a smile. "Let's start with the venue deposit, $12,000, paid on May 3rd, I said, tapping the screen. Then the catering, $14,000, paid in 3 installments. The final one was in July, remember that? The florist was $8,500, not including the additional charges when you decided 2 days before the ceremony that you wanted more eucalyptus for the aesthetic. I looked up. No one was moving. Lauren tried to interrupt, flustered. Okay, but I cut her off. Dress alterations. $900. Paid directly to the seamstress because the boutique said they wouldn't proceed without full payment. The honeymoon suite at the resort? $3,200. That was booked on my credit card because the standard room felt too depressing and you were emotionally drained. I looked around the table. None of this was a gift. No one ever said thank you. Not once. I wasn't even invited to half the planning meetings. I was just the checkbook with a smile. My father cleared his throat and leaned forward, trying to soften the moment. Honey, I think we all just got a little carried away. No, I said, louder this time, but still controlled. You don't get to minimize this. I turned my screen to face him. Remember when Mom told me, you know how important this is for your sister? That was when you asked if I could also pay for the guest welcome bags. $800. For monogram tote bags filled with snacks and sunscreen no one even used. I didn't stop. I scrolled through line after line: transportation, DJ deposit, the custom archway, the linens. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes around the table, the discomfort thickening the air. A cousin shifted awkwardly in her seat. My aunt looked down at her lap. No one defended me. No one said anything. But no one tried to deny it either. Lauren's face twisted. You offered to help. I was manipulated, I said flatly. There's a difference. I looked directly at my mother now. And let's not pretend this is new. I've been cleaning up her messes for a decade. Car repairs, rent, vet bills, Brian's failed business attempt. Every time she runs out of money or has a breakdown or changes her mind about what she wants to be this week, it's Rachel to the rescue. My voice didn't shake. Not once. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't flustered. I was past that. I was done. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. My father reached for his glass of water and drank it like it might save him from drowning. Lauren sat back in her chair, arms crossed, still trying to look composed, but her expression was cracked around the edges. Her husband stared down at his plate like he wanted to disappear into the mashed potatoes. I could see it now, the illusion unraveling. Our perfect family narrative, the one built on denial and strategic forgetfulness, was collapsing under the weight of facts. The golden child wasn't glowing anymore. The boring sister, the cold one, the one who chose career over love, had just laid everything bare in front of the entire extended family, and not a single person could argue with the numbers. I didn't want to do this, I said finally, lowering my phone and placing it on the table. But if you're going to insult me in front of people, if you're going to pretend I've contributed nothing, then you're going to hear the truth. No one responded. My mother was staring at her wine like she wished she could disappear into the glass. My father's hand was shaking slightly. Lauren was still fuming, but there was nothing left for her to say. She knew the numbers were real. She knew everyone in that room had just seen the truth. There was no twisting this. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. For all of them. Because the moment I stood up, the roles shifted forever. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the silent enabler. I was the one who broke the script. And you could see it in their faces, that slow, dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, they had misunderstood who I was all along. I didn't stay for dessert. I left that Thanksgiving dinner, without looking back. I didn't clear my plate, didn't say goodbye, didn't wait for someone to walk me to the door. I stood up, calmly picked up my coat and purse from the back of a chair, and walked out of my parents' house like I was walking out of a job I should have quit years ago. My mother followed me to the foyer, sputtering something about how I was overreacting, how this isn't how family handles things, her voice hushed and frantic, as if the damage could still be undone if she just said the right combination of words. But I didn't respond. I opened the door, stepped into the cold, and let it close behind me with a quiet finality that felt far louder than anything said at that table. The air outside was sharp and clean. The kind of cold that wakes you up, bites your skin, and reminds you that you're alive. It felt good. Real. I sat in my car for a while, hands gripping the wheel, eyes burning not with tears, but with something harder, clarity. A decade's worth of silence had just unraveled in front of 20 people, and for the first time, I hadn't swallowed it. I hadn't laughed it off or absorbed it or tried to make it easier for everyone else. I had spoken, and no one could pretend it hadn't happened. The days that followed were like watching a slow, desperate PR campaign unfold in real time, one led by people who had never once considered they might not be the good guys in someone else's story. It started with texts from my mother, long and overly sweet messages about how everyone was just tired and how we didn't mean for things to come out that way, followed quickly by thinly veiled attempts to guilt me. Your sister is very upset. She hasn't slept in days. You know how sensitive she is. I ignored them. Then came the phone calls. My dad left a voicemail acting like the entire incident had been a misunderstanding. We all got a little emotional, he said, like it had been a passionate debate over football, not a public character assassination followed by a fiscal reckoning. My mother's voice came next, softer, almost pleading. Rachel, we're family. We don't air our grievances like that. You made your point, okay? Now come home. We can fix this. I didn't return the calls. It didn't stop there. Word spread through the extended family, like wildfire. Within days, I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My Aunt Judith called to say she understood how I felt, but that it was time to move forward. My cousin Ava sent me a text that started with "You're not wrong, but," and spiraled into a lecture about grace and forgiveness. One by one, they all reached out, not to ask how I was, not to apologize or acknowledge the years I had spent quietly bleeding into the cracks of their dysfunction, but to urge me to be the bigger person, to let it go, to put family first. That phrase, family comes first, it landed like an insult, as if I had been putting anything else ahead of them all these years. As if I hadn't spent a decade funneling my money, my time, my emotional labor into a system that gave me nothing back but criticism and conditional affection. Where was that philosophy when I was footing bills no one acknowledged? Where was it when I was left out of praise, when I was made to feel like an afterthought unless someone needed a bailout? It was always family first until it came to me. For a while, I drafted responses I never sent. Long messages filled with details and timelines and bruised truths. But I stopped myself. Not because I doubted what I had said, but because I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation for finally defending myself. They had heard it. They had seen it. That night at the table was not a moment of madness. It was the truth breaking the surface after years of forced quiet. Lauren never reached out directly. Not a single message. No apology. No reflection. Just silence. Maybe she was waiting for me to cave. Maybe she truly believed she was the victim. It didn't matter anymore. I had nothing left to give her. Not my energy. Not my attention. And certainly not my money. That was the part that came last. When my mother finally realized I wasn't softening, she called me one more time. This time, she dropped the performative warmth. Her voice was tight-clipped, tired. She said things were getting back on track and asked, point blank, if I could help with a few of the remaining balances from the wedding. Apparently, there were still some final payments to the florist and the DJ. She said it in the same tone she always used, like we were talking about groceries or errands. As if everything was back to normal. As if the financial burden could quietly be reassumed without ceremony. That was the last straw. I remember exactly where I was standing. In my kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter. I stared out the window, phone pressed to my ear, and said it without hesitation. The Bank of Rachel is officially closed. Silence. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just said, I see, and hung up. And that was it. No more explanations. No more justifying myself. No more performing gratitude for being tolerated by people who never really saw me. I didn't rage. I didn't retaliate. I just stepped back. And for the first time in my life, the quiet was mine. Not the silence I used to keep peace, but the kind that comes when you finally reclaim your own voice and decide not to waste it anymore. 3 weeks after I walked out of my parents' house and detonated the illusion of our perfect family, I got a message from Lauren. Not a forwarded guilt trip from my mother or a passive-aggressive comment in the family group chat, just a short, quiet text sent directly to me. It read, "Can we meet? Please. Just us. I need to talk." No emojis, no exclamation points, no pretense. Just a simple, raw request. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it. I'd spent the past few weeks reclaiming peace. Real peace. Not the performance of being fine, but the honest, clean silence that comes from finally removing yourself from a system that only values you when you're useful. I hadn't missed any of them. Not the phone calls, not the social media posts, not even the holidays we were apparently still pretending to salvage. But this felt different. I could tell from the wording. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Public place. Neutral ground. A small cafe not far from my apartment. A place with big windows, quiet tables, and a barista who never asked too many questions.
She was already there when I arrived.
I saw her through the window before I even opened the door, and for a second, I didn't recognize her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, hunched forward, shoulders caved inward like she was trying to fold herself into the chair. Her hair was pulled back hastily, not styled. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed in red, and she was wearing one of Brian's old hoodies, too big on her, sleeves swallowing her hands. The Lauren I had always known, shiny, curated, breezy, was gone. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't some bid for sympathy or validation. She looked genuinely wrecked. When she saw me walk in, she stood too quickly, knocking the edge of the table with her knee and wincing. "Rachel," she said, her voice cracking on the first syllable. I nodded once and sat down.
I didn't reach out. I didn't say it was okay.
I just waited. She sat too, eyes flicking around like she was waiting for someone to come save her. But no one did. "Brian's gone," she said finally, barely louder than a whisper. "He left." Her hands were shaking as she wrapped them around the paper coffee cup in front of her, but I could tell it had gone cold a while ago.
I didn't respond.
She swallowed. It happened after Thanksgiving. A few days after, actually. He saw a post. Someone from the family must have mentioned something on Facebook, or maybe it was the group chat, I don't know. But he asked me. He asked who paid for the wedding. She blinked hard, trying to steady herself. And I couldn't lie. Not anymore. Not after everything. She looked up at me then. No mask. No spin. Just exhaustion and shame. He didn't know, she said quietly. He thought it came from Mom and Dad. He thought we were all, I don't know, contributing. That we had saved or figured it out. He didn't know it was you. Still, I said nothing. Lauren's lips trembled. He was furious. Not just about the money, although, yeah, that too, but about the lie. About what it meant. About the fact that I let him stand up there and toast to a future built on a fantasy I let him believe. He said it made the whole thing feel fake. Like it wasn't his wedding. Like he was just a prop in someone else's show. She paused. He packed a bag that night.
Said he needed time.
Said he didn't know who I was anymore. And he hasn't come back. She didn't cry, not right away. But I could see her clenching her jaw, breathing in sharp, shallow breaths like she was trying to hold herself together with the last threads she had left. Her hands were trembling harder now, knuckles white around the cup. I didn't mean for it to be like that, she said finally. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I didn't know how to say no when they offered. And when you started paying, she broke off, exhaling hard. I told myself it was fine. That you could afford it. That you didn't mind. That it was easier not to talk about it. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw her without the layers. Without the persona, the curated chaos, the charm. Just Lauren.
Scared.
Worn down. Maybe even honest. She leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling. I know I've taken advantage of you. I know I've been a shit sister. I know I should have stopped it.
Said something.
Thanked you. Paid you back. But I didn't. And now everything's falling apart. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't trying to twist it into an apology laced with conditions. She just sat there in front of me, unraveling. I don't know what to do, she whispered. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I let the weight of her words hang in the air, let her sit in the silence I'd lived in for years. And then, finally, I said the only thing that felt true. I know, I said quietly. I didn't either. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, she didn't try to fix it, didn't try to justify. She just sat back, quiet and wrecked. And for once, I didn't feel like it was my job to put her back together. It happened quietly, almost too quietly, the way some of the most disorienting truths do. We were still sitting in that cafe, the tension finally softening into something less explosive, more fragile. Lauren had just finished telling me about Brian leaving, and for the first time, she wasn't spinning or deflecting or asking for anything. It had taken everything in her to say it aloud. And maybe that's why what came next didn't land with a sharp edge of accusation. It came out almost like a question, a tentative offering of her own confusion, like she didn't want to shatter the moment, but couldn't let it go unspoken. Rachel, she said softly, eyes flicking to mine, I don't want to fight, but I think there may have been a misunderstanding. About the money. I didn't react at first. I was still processing everything else, and my defenses were worn down from weeks of silence, and then that raw, shaking hour of watching my sister fall apart in front of me. So I just sat there, staring at her, waiting. She hesitated, clearly afraid. She was about to reopen a wound that had just barely begun to scab. Brian and I, after everything came out, we went back through everything. Every receipt, every charge, every email confirmation we had. I needed to know, I needed to be sure. My throat tightened slightly. We found a few things that didn't match what you said. Some stuff, it wasn't you. The honeymoon suite? That was charged to Brian's card. I remember because I got into a fight with him about it when he upgraded without telling me. And the engagement party? Mom and Dad paid for the catering. I didn't even know they had until Brian showed me the Venmo history. She paused, watching me carefully. You did a lot.
More than anyone should have asked.
But it wasn't 80,000. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I didn't argue. I didn't immediately reject it. Something about the way she said it, not defensive, not smug, just quietly factual, made me listen. And that scared me more than anything else. I went home that night and opened my laptop. I sat at the kitchen table, same place I had so many nights before, budgeting, reviewing statements, transferring money. I pulled up the spreadsheet I had relied on during the wedding. At the time, I hadn't meant for it to become a tally of resentment. It had started as a simple record, a practical tool. But somewhere along the way, I stopped updating it with accuracy and started relying on memory, and memory, as I was about to learn, is not the same thing as proof. The numbers were all there. I cross-referenced credit card statements, PayPal transfers, receipts in my inbox. One by one, I worked through them. DJ, check. Florist, yes. Dress tailoring, that was me. But the honeymoon charge? Not there. I double-checked. It was on Brian's Amex, and the resort confirmation had been emailed to him, not me. The engagement party, I hadn't paid the deposit. It was clearly from my mother's bank account. I felt something cold unravel inside my chest. By the time I had finished verifying everything, the final total sat in front of me, not as a guess or an estimate, but as hard data. $32,647. Not 80. Not even close. Still significant. Still more than I should have been expected to give. But it wasn't what I had said. Not what I had declared in front of 20 people during Thanksgiving dinner, phone in hand, voice steady, certainty radiating off me like truth. It wasn't what I had weaponized in a moment of long-held pain. I had believed it. Every word. I had believed I was telling the truth. And that's what made it worse. I had distorted the numbers. Maybe not on purpose. Maybe it had been the product of years of pressure, of emotional exhaustion, of keeping track of so many unpaid debts that they'd started to blur into one colossal, exaggerated figure. Maybe it had been the only way to make anyone finally listen. But it wasn't accurate. I had used it like a sword, and I had cut more deeply than I realized. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the only sound in the apartment the low hum of the fridge behind me. There was no immediate plan, no righteous anger to cling to, no justifications left to reach for. Just the facts. I had miscalculated. I had spoken with finality, with precision, with the full confidence of someone who is sure of her own victimhood. And I had been wrong. I thought about Brian. About what it must have felt like to hear, suddenly, from extended family members or friends or cryptic Facebook comments, that the wedding he thought he and Lauren had pulled off with their limited means was actually bankrolled by someone else. I thought about the pride he must have had in thinking they'd done something on their own, however imperfectly, and how that pride must have shattered the moment he realized he'd been left out of the truth. And I thought about Lauren. Not the Lauren I had spent years resenting, but the one sitting in that cafe, trembling, looking like her whole world had collapsed around her, and she didn't know how to hold it up anymore.
I had seen something real in her that day.
Not performance. Not manipulation. Just someone who had finally reached the bottom of whatever fantasy she'd been floating through. And I had met her there with a number I hadn't even verified. I didn't cry. Not then. There was no dramatic wave of guilt or sudden redemption. Just a slow, creeping understanding that I had done harm in the process of trying to protect myself. That I had been right about the dynamic, the emotional manipulation, the imbalance, the favoritism, but I had been wrong about the scale of it. And that wrongness had consequences. I had spent years being overlooked, undervalued, taken for granted. But in that moment, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I had to face something even harder. This time, I was the one who had gone too far. I didn't sleep the night. I recalculated the wedding costs. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the spreadsheet still glowing on my laptop screen across the room like a quiet accusation. The number sat there in black and white. 32,000, not 80. and with it, a truth I hadn't allowed myself to see for years. I wasn't just hurt. I was warped, bent around a core of unspoken bitterness, so old and layered that I no longer trusted my own memory. I had turned every slight, every dismissal, every missed thank you into a ledger that ballooned far beyond what had actually happened. And when I finally spoke, I had delivered it all as gospel, never once questioning how my pain had distorted the truth. It was more than just the money. It was how deeply I had come to define myself by the ways I was ignored. Every time someone forgot my birthday, every time a gift I gave went unacknowledged, every holiday where I watched Lauren get smothered in praise while I stood on the sidelines, I had tallied them, silently. It wasn't conscious. I didn't have a journal somewhere listing every grievance. But it lived in me, in the way I looked at her, in the coldness of my tone, in the tightness in my chest whenever my parents brought her up like she was a constellation, and I was the sky she borrowed light from. I told myself I was simply remembering facts. But facts, I realized, don't breathe like that. They don't swell. They don't evolve. They don't rot into something self-serving. That next morning, after a shower that felt like trying to wash something off my skin that wouldn't budge, I got dressed, got in my car, and drove to Lauren's apartment. I didn't text her in advance. I didn't overthink what I would say. I just knew that if I didn't speak to her face-to-face, if I didn't own what I had done, not as a defensive caveat, not as a reluctant correction, but fully, plainly, and without conditions, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. She answered the door in sweats, her eyes puffy, hair still wet from the shower, like maybe she hadn't been sleeping much either. For a second, she looked confused to see me, then wary. But she stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was quiet. Lived in but heavy. A few dirty dishes in the sink, an open blanket on the couch, a pair of Brian sneakers still by the door, a presence lingering even in absence. I stood in the center of her living room, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass, and spoke without ceremony. I was wrong. She didn't respond right away. I continued. I checked everything. The receipts, the emails, the charges. It wasn't 80,000. It wasn't even half that. It was a lot, but not what I said. Not what I made it out to be. She watched me carefully, saying nothing. I didn't lie, I said slowly. But I didn't tell the truth either. Not really. I believed it. I believed I had done more than I did, because that's what it felt like. Because I've been angry for so long I stopped seeing clearly. I let all of it, the years of being ignored, of being useful and not loved. I let that twist things. I convinced myself I was just finally being honest, but I was punishing you. I wanted you to hurt. I'm sorry. It was the most stripped-down version of myself I had ever offered her. No armor. No detachment.
Just me.
And for a few seconds, I stood there in silence, heart pounding, feeling like I had just handed her a weapon she could use against me. But she didn't. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch and gestured for me to do the same. I knew it wasn't 80, she said softly. I didn't say anything at dinner, because, honestly, I was terrified. Of you. Of the way you looked at me. You were so calm, but so sure. I've never seen you like that. It scared me. I looked down at my hands. I had scared her. I, the steady one, the reasonable one, had finally exploded in a way that felt surgical and absolute. And I had been wrong. She went on. But I also knew I didn't have the right to correct you. Because I did take advantage of you. I did act like it was your job to clean up after me. I let you pay for things you shouldn't have, and I never thanked you properly. I told myself it didn't matter because you could afford it, but that's not the point. I was entitled. I was lazy. And I've been coasting on this idea that just because I'm a little broken, other people owe me softness. I used my sadness like a shield. She paused. So, yeah, maybe you exaggerated the number. But I created the environment where that exaggeration made sense. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I saw the mirror. Not just what she had done to me, but what I had done to her. We had both been playing parts in a family dynamic that rewarded silence and punished honesty. She played the adored disaster. I played the bitter savior. And neither of us ever broke character, even when the stage collapsed. There was no grand resolution. No sweeping hug. No promises to start fresh or rebuild. Just two sisters sitting in the quiet, finally seeing each other in full, flaws, faults, failures, and all. It didn't fix everything, but it was the first time we both stopped pretending. I never expected anything to change. After years of trying, of waiting for acknowledgement that never came, I had quietly decided that some families just don't evolve. I didn't believe in transformation. Not in our house. We had built too much around the roles we were each expected to play. I was the one who held everything together. Lauren was the one who fell apart beautifully, and our parents were the well-meaning but oblivious center of gravity that we orbited out of obligation more than affection. I had long since stopped hoping for change. I only wanted distance. But then, little by little, something shifted. It started with Lauren. The same Lauren who had floated from one dreamy aspiration to the next, whose identity seemed to change with the seasons, who had been carried by other people's support for so long that I doubted she even remembered how to stand on her own. After our conversation, something in her recalibrated. A few weeks passed, and she sent me a message that simply read, "I just finished my first day." Attached was a photo of her outside a glass office building, badge clipped to her jacket, hair pulled back, makeup understated. She looked tired, but there was a steadiness in her face I hadn't seen before. She had gotten a full-time job, a real one, with a small but reputable marketing firm that specialized in local campaigns. Not some influencer brand or pyramid scheme, not a short-lived startup run by her boyfriend's friend, but an actual job, with a title and a salary and hours. She'd applied herself, interviewed twice, submitted a portfolio, and gotten in. And she was proud. Not performative proud, not Instagram story proud. Just quietly, solidly proud. She told me later that she and Brian had started couples counseling. That he'd come back after a long, painful conversation and an even harder admission, that he'd felt embarrassed and betrayed, not because she was flawed, but because she hadn't trusted him enough to tell the truth. They were both working on it. Slowly. Honestly. She wasn't asking me for approval. She wasn't even announcing it like a grand update. She was just letting me see it unfold. And that, more than anything, felt new. Then came the real shock. My parents began therapy. It happened after a cousin who had been at Thanksgiving and heard everything forwarded them a link to an article about emotional neglect and golden child syndrome. Apparently, it struck a nerve. Or maybe it was the fact that no one in the family looked at them the same way after that dinner. The illusion had cracked open too wide. They couldn't brush it away. They couldn't pretend my anger had come from nowhere. And they couldn't avoid the uncomfortable truth staring them in the face. They had favored one child over the other. For years. Visibly. Repeatedly. And now everyone knew. It was my father who reached out first. Not with excuses, not with that usual bland tone that tried to smooth everything over. He asked if we could talk, just him and me. We met at a park near their house, the kind with benches and ducks and families taking weekend walks. He didn't say much at first. He looked older than I remembered, like the past few months had aged him in a way that years hadn't. And then, with his hands clasped between his knees, he said, "I think we did real damage. I think we didn't see you." He looked at me and for the first time didn't look through me. We kept telling ourselves you were fine, because you didn't need us the same way she did. But that was our excuse. That was us being lazy. You didn't make trouble, so we didn't check in. We didn't listen. And we didn't say, "Thank you. I'm sorry, Rachel." It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't rehearsed. It was honest. Quiet. Almost painful in its simplicity. And it broke something in me. Not in a destructive way, but like when scar tissue finally softens, and you realize you've been clenching for years without knowing it. My mother followed not long after. We sat in the living room one afternoon while she folded laundry, not looking at me directly. "I think I always saw myself in Lauren," she said quietly. "I wanted her to have the life I never did. And I think I treated you like you were already grown. Like you didn't need mothering. But you did. And I failed you in ways I didn't even notice until you said it out loud." She turned to me then, her hands stilling in the pile of towels. "I am proud of you. So proud. And not just for your career. For your strength. For holding the line, when I didn't even realize there was one. You didn't just survive this family, Rachel. You showed us what it really means to be accountable." I didn't cry. But I felt the ground shift. They began therapy as a couple soon after that. It wasn't perfect. They still slipped into old habits, still occasionally said things that made me bristle, but now there was a pause. A moment of reflection. A willingness to listen. And that was new. As for me, I stopped trying to force resolution. I let things rebuild slowly, on neutral ground, without obligation. I didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. But I also didn't weaponize it. I let them earn my trust again. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Through presence. It was small things. My dad called just to say he saw an article about a logistics breakthrough and thought of me. My mom asked about my latest project and listened. Not distracted listening, real, engaged interest. They sent a card on my birthday.
Just a card.
No gift. No extravagance. But both of them had signed it, and both had written messages that weren't generic. My mom wrote, "You've always been the quiet force in this family. I see that now." For the first time in my life, I believed her. Months passed, not in dramatic leaps or sweeping changes, but in quiet, deliberate moments that slowly rewrote the shape of my family. Nothing happened overnight. The damage had been too deep, too embedded in our habits, in the way we spoke and didn't speak, in the roles we wore like second skin. But what surprised me most wasn't that healing started. It was that, for the first time, we all seemed committed to doing it right. No shortcuts. No pretending. Just small, honest work. Lauren and I stopped walking around each other like strangers bound by shared blood. We began again, not as the reliable sister and the chaotic one, not as the silent martyr and the adored mess, but simply as two women who had grown up in the same house, under the same roof, shaped by the same flawed love. She didn't over-apologize. I didn't withhold. We spoke clearly, cautiously at first, like testing ice that had once cracked beneath us. But the ground held. She set up a repayment plan without prompting, a quiet acknowledgement of what she had taken without realizing the cost. It wasn't grand or performative, just a simple spreadsheet she emailed me with monthly transfers she could afford and a short message. "This isn't about the amount. It's about showing I understand now." I didn't need the money, not anymore. But I didn't reject it either. Because for once, she wasn't asking me to carry her. She was showing me she could stand. And for the first time in my adult life, our conversations weren't one-sided. She asked about my work and listened without glazing over. She sent me a podcast she thought I'd enjoy, and it had nothing to do with crystals or cosmic energy, but about managing burnout in leadership roles. She said she thought of me when she heard it. That mattered more than I could explain. Then came the dinner. My grandmother's idea, a quiet, casual meal at her house. She hadn't taken sides during the Thanksgiving fallout, which somehow made her the safest person in the family. Her home had always been neutral ground, wood-paneled walls, overcooked roast chicken, and a mismatched set of dinner plates that had survived 5 decades of holiday squabbles. It was the kind of place where people softened, where things felt less performative. So I agreed to go. I arrived without expectations. I'd stopped expecting anything from these gatherings long ago. But this time, the air was different. Lighter somehow. My father greeted me at the door with a genuine smile and a warm hug, not rushed, not obligatory, just real. During dinner, he turned to me and asked about a recent project I'd been leading, not in that vague way he used to, but with actual curiosity. He asked follow-up questions. Listened. My mother, seated across the table, chimed in with something surprising. "You've always been good at building things from scratch. I admire that about you." She looked at me, not at the plate, not past me, but directly into my eyes when she said it. She had said kind things before, but this felt different. Not forced. Not filtered through a comparison to Lauren. Just clean, unqualified acknowledgement. Lauren sat beside me, quiet for the first half of the meal, letting the atmosphere settle before adding her voice. There was no grand speech. No awkward tension. Just the occasional glance, the kind that said, "I know we're still working on this, but I'm here." Then, just as dessert was being cleared, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. She slid it across the table to me and said, "This is for you. For real." Inside was a check for $500, not a life-changing amount, not even close to what I'd once paid without question. But tucked with it was something I hadn't expected, a handwritten note, several pages long, folded neatly, filled top to bottom with Lauren's familiar handwriting. She had titled it simply, "Thank you." I read it that night after I got home, sitting on my couch, the envelope still warm from being held in my hand for the better part of the evening. The note listed everything she remembered. Every late-night ride, every quiet deposit, every holiday where I filled in the gaps, every sacrifice she now realized had come at a cost I never spoke about. She didn't try to rationalize her behavior. She didn't defend the past. She simply acknowledged it, line by line, with a kind of clarity that made my throat ache. At the bottom, she had written, "I used to think you didn't need anything because you were so strong. I see now that I was wrong. You needed support too. You needed to be seen. And I didn't give you that."
I'm sorry.
This isn't about balancing a financial debt. It's about showing up differently from now on. I didn't cry, but I sat in silence for a long time, holding that paper, realizing that this note, this shift, this quiet dignity was what I had been waiting for all along. Not repayment, not revenge, not even justice, just recognition. The kind that can't be bought. The kind that finally makes space for someone who had been there the whole time, waiting to be seen. It came on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of slow, sunlit morning where everything feels a little softer, a little more grounded. I was sitting on my balcony with coffee, flipping absentmindedly through a book I hadn't really been reading, when my phone buzzed with a new message. I didn't expect anything significant, probably a work reminder or a promotional email, but when I glanced down and saw Lauren's name, something in my chest stilled. There was a single photo attached. No preamble. Just an image that said more than words ever could. It was her and Brian, seated together at a small, warmly lit dining table, smiling with the kind of ease that only comes after surviving something difficult together. The table was simple, mismatched plates, a single bottle of wine, candles burning low. There was a casserole dish in the center, something homemade and slightly overbaked at the edges, which made me smile. Behind them, the wall was bare but clean, with a small framed print hanging slightly off-center, like they hadn't gotten around to adjusting it yet. But that wasn't what hit me. What struck me was what I could see beyond them through the window, the outline of a quiet suburban street, the edge of a yard, a modest front porch with a porch swing. They had bought a house. Lauren had once told me she couldn't imagine being tied to a mortgage, couldn't picture herself owning anything permanent. And now here she was, in a place of her own, not borrowed, not funded by family, not floating, hers. Below the photo, a caption read, 1 year married, 6 months financially independent. Thank you for showing us what real support means. It was short, unembellished, but it landed with the weight of 1,000 conversations. I stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering above the screen, unsure whether to reply or just sit with it. Because in that moment, something settled inside me, something I hadn't even realized was still restless. A kind of closure that didn't need fanfare or ceremony. Just acknowledgement. It had been a year since that Thanksgiving. A year since I said what I'd been holding in for over a decade. A year since I cracked the narrative wide open and forced everyone to look at what we'd all helped build, not a family but a dynamic built on convenience, silence, and imbalance. And now, on the other side of all that chaos, we weren't just different people. We were better people. My relationship with Lauren wasn't perfect. We still had moments where the past tugged at us, where our old patterns knocked on the door. But we answered differently now. We spoke honestly, directly, without games. We didn't lean on each other out of habit or guilt. We chose to show up because we wanted to. And that made all the difference. As for my parents, they had changed in their own quiet, deliberate ways. They didn't try to erase the past or pretend it hadn't happened. They owned it. My mother had started sending short texts every few weeks, things like "saw this and thought of you," or "how did your meeting go?" Not big gestures, but steady ones. My father asked more questions now, and more importantly, listened to the answers. The distance that had once felt like a chasm between us was now more like a respectful pause, space we both acknowledged, but didn't fear. And me? I was no longer the family's quiet pillar, the dependable structure that everyone leaned on but never looked at. I wasn't the fixer or the financier, the one who stayed strong so others could stay soft. I was just a person, a daughter, a sister, an equal. I had stopped keeping track, not because I stopped caring, but because I no longer needed proof of what I had done. I had lived it. I had paid the price, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. And now, I had something I never thought I would have: peace. That message from Lauren wasn't just a thank you. It was a full-circle moment I never knew I'd get. Not because she owed it to me, but because she had grown into someone who could give it freely. And that, more than any repayment plan or apology or family dinner, is what made everything worth it. I didn't reply right away. I just sat with it, the photo, the words, the quiet, the sun warming my skin, and allowed myself, for the first time in years, to simply feel proud. Not for enduring, not for surviving, but for changing something that had once felt unchangeable, for breaking the cycle, for forcing the truth into a space that had always made room for denial, for refusing to stay small so others could stay comfortable, and finally, for becoming the person I had always needed, not just for them but for myself.